Good morning. If you are able, please stand and turn in your green Sing the Journey to number 81, Take, O Take Me As I Am.
Welcome to Sonnenberg and this hour of song, prayer, and worship. Today we will incorporate the sacrament of communion, remembering Jesus' suffering and sacrifice. Also, we will commune together as a people who humbly recognize that we are not just individuals in this journey of life. We are bound together, foibles and strengths, seeking to do God's will. So we gather as imperfect people, striving to be the good news for a world that seems to be in disarray with warfare, divisions, and brokenness. But we have the confidence that God is victorious and able to sustain us through life's challenges and difficulties. David's poetic verse in Psalm 34 gives us courage, and we find in verses 7, 8, and 9 of Psalm 34. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. It seems appropriate to take communion during this season of harvest. The grapes are juiced, and the wheat is baked, and the gluten is parsed from the bread, and the gluten-free berries are cooked. Although I might not have that quite right. And just as Christ demonstrated his faithfulness to God, so too do we share our faithfulness with each other through this act of remembrance. Let us worship with grateful hearts and with a generous spirit. Let us enter into worship with this prayer from Psalm 34, verses 8 through 10. O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. O fear the Lord, you his people, for those who fear him will lack nothing. The lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack nothing. Amen.
If you are able, please stand and turn in your blue worship book to number 98, Sing to the Lord of Harvest. you will flip over to 327, Great is Thy Faithfulness.
Our scripture this morning is from the first chapter of Ruth, verses 1 through 17. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this they wept aloud. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me."
Grace to you and peace from God our Father and Jesus Christ our Lord. It is good to be able to gather together and to see all your faces. Welcome to any visitors we have here among us and those listening in. It has been a very rich last couple weeks for me. I've had a number of profound interactions and moving experiences, and God has been very near. And I'm excited to share this morning a message that I believe God has for us from this passage. First, I want to ask a question. Who do you know that has gone before us that have made significant decisions that have had lasting effects? Maybe you yourself have made decisions in your life, or I'm thinking about like ancestors, those that have gone before us. And I think back to, even the time of our Anabaptist forebears, that, the radical Reformation that helped the Anabaptist and Mennonite tradition be what it is, that we have the faith that we have today. The people that have suffered, people that have, gave up their lives for the faith that we have. I have a couple examples. You may be thinking of people that have gone before us. One example, first, is my grandfather. Now, none of you met him. His name was who I'm named after, Glenn William Nofziger. And I love hearing stories about my grandparents. And not everything is always good, but most of everything that I've learned about my grandpa is very positive. And the one thing in particular that I want to share is something that has been kind of a legacy of his. My dad, when he was in his 20s, the farm was a tomato farm. They raised tomatoes for Campbell's. And there were migrant workers that came up from Mexico and worked there on the farm. The story that I remember that is so dear is that my grandfather treated that family like brothers and sisters in Christ. And the old man, Guillermo was his name, which is William in English, and my grandpa they had such mutual respect for one another. And it's one of my favorite stories about my grandpa and how they had worship services there on the farm. And, not all the stories are good, some are bad, but I remember standing in the houses. There were a lot of outbuildings there on the farm where the migrant workers would come and live. I remember standing in the building where they kept all the seed corn bags. And I can still picture it. I only was in there like once or twice, but I can remember and my dad telling me this is one of the houses where they lived. And so it was back when my dad was in his 20s. It was about 10, 12 years where they grew tomatoes. But the stories of the solidarity that my grandpa treated this family with utmost respect. They were not lesser because they were migrant workers that came up from Mexico. They were equal brothers and sisters in Christ. And the impact that had on this family, that they decided to move from Mexico and move to Archbold. And their family stayed. They were the Tijerinas. And the next generation were all like my dad's age. There was Guillermo, the oldest, and then there was Manuel and Jacob, and there was a couple sisters. And when my dad was dying, that last week of his life, when we had visitation while he could still receive people, Jacob, the one brother that was about my dad's age, came and told that exact story about how Grandpa treated their dad, Guillermo, with such respect and in solidarity, and it meant so much. And that testimony said again, just reinforced the significance of how the decisions that they chose to interact with one another. Another story that I want to share, I want to read this story, Menno's Marvelous Day. The MCC cannery comes to town. And it's appropriate to read this morning to go along with the message, but also because it's the weekend of the cannery that comes to town, and we have some of the canner guys that are here with us this morning. So I'm going to invite the Venture Club age. What do you have here? Any second or third through 7th grade, and any of the ones back there at the creativity corner. Welcome to come up and sit in this front pew so you can see the pictures. Now, I also have the pictures up there so everyone can see these pictures, but I'm going to read this story of Menno's Marvelous Day. So you're welcome to come on up and sit in the front pew, and you can sit in the front pew so you can see best, and I'll read it to everyone. Now, as you're coming up, I'll say a little bit more about this story. I think Virgin gave us this book last year. So, I've moved to Kidron here. I've been here now a little over a year. And I think Virgin gave us this book, but I don't remember reading it last year. And Virgin stopped in earlier this week and mentioned this book and mentioned Trent, and all his work. And I was thinking about my analogy, my opening stories of the stories, what major decisions have happened that have had lasting effect. And many of you know the story of how MCC began, and this tells some of that, but it also just goes through the story of this young boy and his experience, and of helping with the meat canner. And I just had scanned, I took a picture of all the pages and walked up, and then I got a message from Priscilla saying that they needed some extra help at the meat canner. Urgent request, come immediately, need like 10 people. And so some of us shared that post, and then Luke and I went right up there to go help because we had like an hour and a half before we needed to be somewhere. And I get up there, and as I had just read through this book, and I looked like I recognized a couple people. I'm like, that is Pete Erb. There's people in here that this book is based after. And Luke and I get up there, and I think Karen Geiser, someone that asks us, have we done this before? And I'm like, well, I helped last year, but I've never helped with labeling. And she's like, oh, there's this book around here. And she was looking for this book. And, I had wondered, who are these characters? And she goes, oh, and there's this boy who was the boy in the story, and he's standing right here. And it's Carrie. You want to stand up and say hello? And I sit down next to Carrie for an hour and a half, and we work together labeling the cans. And so I said, I just took a picture of every page of this book and said that I was going to read it this morning. And he's like, well, you want me to come? I'm like, sure, come on. It's because he goes to Salem. His dad is Lance, and I recognized his grandpa in the one picture too. So I'm going to read the story about Menno's marvelous day and the experience and the story behind MCC. So, Menno's marvelous day, the MCC cannery comes to town. I'll put the dedication at the end. Menno wakes up early today. It is still dark outside, but he doesn't mind a bit because he has a special place to go with his dad. Every year, his dad helps can turkey meat at Food for Relief in Kidron, and this is the first time Menno gets to go along with him. Menno sees other people coming to help. He wonders if he will know anyone. Menno is happy to see someone from his church and waves. This is a good place to be, and Menno is glad that he came. And there's all those pictures of different buildings in Kidron. Inside the Gerber building, Menno joins a happy gathering of people. Everyone is so friendly and glad to see him, and the Gerber building is right behind Central Christian School. Here's a verse from Hebrews 10:24. Let us consider how we may spur one another toward love and good deeds. The most important thing comes first. Everyone gathers together in a circle to pray. Bowing their heads, they ask God to bless the work of the day. Now is the time to get busy. Menno's dad puts on a white coat and washes his hands. Menno laughs when his dad puts on a hairnet. Other men are covering their beards with a net. All workers must be careful to keep hair out of the meat while they are working. And this display looks exactly like it looks inside the building. Menno is told that he must obey the floor managers in the blue hairnets. These men keep the work area safe for everyone. It is up to them to organize the volunteers to finish all the work in just 3 days. A loud truck air horn blows. It's time to start working. Before he goes, Menno asks his dad a question. What will you be doing? Good question, Menno, his dad answers. There are many tasks to do here today. Where I will be working, the turkey meat must be first heated and stirred in a big pot. Next, we scoop up the pieces of meat out of the pot and put them into tin cans. Then each can is carefully weighed. After that, a heavy machine stamps on the lid, sealing the can tight. Finally, all the cans are stacked in a metal basket and boiled in very hot water. Menno watches the canner boys as they work the heavy equipment. There are so many things to do when canning to make sure the meat will be safe to eat. Meanwhile, heavy wooden tables are set up and people in white coats are talking and laughing as they cut turkey into small cubes, just the right size for canning. Someone begins a hymn that Menno knows well, and he sings along. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. That song. Menno sees a woman bring in a big pot of soup to serve for lunch. Someone else carries a platter of cheese. Everyone looks and smells. Everything looks and smells so good. I'm not sure how everyone smells. Probably like turkey meat. Would you like a banana to eat? Yes, please, says Menno. Menno's dad is done helping can the first batch of turkey meat. He sits down with his friends to take a break. It was hard, hot work, but the workers are glad to do it. This is where I recognized Carrie's grandpa. I was like, I know that guy. That's Don. Why can't I say Layman? Thank you. And this book was written, about 12 years ago? 11 years ago? You were about 8 years old when this was written. Menno listens to their stories about when MCC meat canning first began. Years ago, at the end of a terrible war, there were many hungry people, and Mennonites wanted to help, so they sent canned meat to eat. In the beginning, local farmers offered us a space to work in. First, we canned meat in a potato barn. After that, we used a farm shed. And that says A.C. Ramsire Potato Barn on Akron Road. And then Clarence Nussbaum's shed on Zerker Road. Together we built the Gerber building to use for canning. It was named for a young local volunteer, Daniel Gerber, who served with MCC in Vietnam many years ago. I liked using the bulldozer to dig the foundation, someone remembers. Menno agrees. That does sound like fun. Menno meets the 4 MCC volunteer canner boys. These young men drive the canner truck across North America, stopping in towns just like here in Kidron, where people want to can meat for the hungry. And there's signs here for the different towns. It says Elmira, Ontario, 363 miles that way. Freeman, South Dakota, 976 miles that way. Penn Yan, New York, 343 miles that way. Goshen, Indiana, 258.6 miles. Ephrata, PA, 362 miles. And Newton, Kansas, 946 miles. All these towns all over the United States and in Canada. Hey, Grandpa, says Menno, weren't you a canner boy a long time ago? Yes, that's right, his grandfather remembers. As a young man, I was in voluntary service and traveled many miles in the MCC canner truck. And there's the article where it says 31 area Mennonite churches start annual meat canning for relief. Cannery, 1966. And where do these cans of meat go, Menno asks. Almost anywhere, he is told. The cans are given to people who need it the most. Some of the cans of meat are sent to faraway places. Others cans stay here to share with people in our own town. Turkey meat canned here in Kidron was shipped to Haiti after a terrible earthquake. It was given to mothers who had no food to feed their children after the disaster. The meat we can today may be shared with orphans in North Korea, families fleeing war in Syria, or to people whose homes are destroyed by a hurricane, tsunami, or typhoon. Just one can of meat mixed with beans, rice, or lentils is enough to make a pot of stew to feed 36 people. Menno is happy to find a place to help. He listens carefully to the floor manager's directions on how the job needs to be done. The cans must be wiped, clean, labels glued on, and stacked in boxes for shipment to far-off places. Menno works hard, but is having fun at the same time. Working side by side with others to help feed the hungry is a marvelous way to spend his day. With plenty of willing hands, soon many cans of turkey meat are boxed and ready to be shipped. A forklift carefully stacks the boxes into place. Menno's day is over, and it is time for him to go. He will be glad to return next year to help. Who knows? Maybe someday he will be an MCC canner boy. Each year, local volunteers at Food for Relief in Kidron can boneless turkey meat distributed by the Mennonite Central Committee to countries affected by war, natural disaster, and malnutrition. And the pictures mentioned here are shown the places around the world: United States, Haiti, Mexico, El Salvador, Bosnia, Ukraine, North Korea, Indonesia, Syrian refugees in Lebanon, and Burundi. And then there's this great song that I'm not going to sing called Turkey in the MCC Can. I did a helpless attempt at sight reading, and Aaron said, maybe I should play that on the piano. And there is the dedication page. In dedication to the many who have volunteered to feed the hungry in the name of Christ through the MCC Kidron Meat Canning Ministry, 1937-2016. The Gerber Building, the building where the canning happens, is building in honor of Daniel Gerber, who went missing in Vietnam in 1962, and all Mennonite Central Committee workers who have given themselves to worldwide service. Thank you for coming up. You can go back to your seats. And thank you, Carrie, for coming and being our guest representative for the book. Thank you, Don, for reading the passage Thank you, Coralie, for the songs. So many of the verses of the songs and what you shared is just so makes the connections this morning. Looking at the story of Ruth, thinking about what is the message here, what is the story that is shared. And there are a number of significant things that jump out to the main message this morning. It starts off in the days when the judges ruled. And right there, when it talks about the judges, when the judges ruled, what we know about that time period in the story and life of the children of Israel is when they were being faithful some of the time and they were not being faithful. It went up and down. And when they were not being faithful, they were ruled, and God had sent disaster, and is a time of famine. It says there was a famine in the land, and this man from Bethlehem, and Bethlehem means house of food or house of bread. And it's a time when the house was empty. There was no food. And it goes from a time of desolation when they were empty. And they went to live in a country called Moab. And it says they have 2 sons. It starts off not too bad with a husband and a wife and 2 sons. Having sons means you're going to have your name continue, means you'll have land, you will have prosperity, likely, by having your family continue on. And they were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now, what's interesting about Moab and Israel, Moab was this country where they were feuding. They had invasions. It reminds me not too dissimilar of what's happening today. There is reference of Moab making invasions and annihilating entire cities in Israel. There is conflict. But this family, because there was no food in Israel, they went to Moab to live. And right then in verse 3 it says, Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women. They were there about 10 years, but then both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Now Naomi, the meaning of the name Naomi means pleasant. Okay? But right here at verse 5, she's left without her husband and without 2 sons. And it takes a turn. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing for them, she hears that the Lord is providing. And so she feels it's the right thing to go back to her home to where God is providing. And she and her daughter-in-laws prepared to return home from there. And with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where they had been living and set out on the road. So they had already began this journey back. And both daughters-in-law were going with her to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Can you picture this happening? Can you picture these 3 women, these 2 Moabite women, willing to go back with their mother-in-law, Naomi, back to a place that was unfamiliar for them? They were leaving their families. They were leaving the land that they were familiar with, and it's a pretty desolate troop. And it seems pretty miserable. What do they have for a future? What do they have to look forward to? I'm sorry, ladies, but it was a patriarchal society. If you didn't have a husband, you basically had no future. You didn't have any security. They were going back to what? They're going back to a place of familiarity because there was food there, because it was Naomi's home, but they're not guaranteed any place to live. It's a desolate outlook. They're like, we've got no food, we've got no land, all our husbands are dying. We don't have much. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go with you back to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have more sons? Are you going to wait for them to grow up? Am I going to find another husband? Have kids, have boys. You wait for them to be married to? Go back to your, and it says to your mother's homes, which is interesting. No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. And down in verse 20, when she gets back to Bethlehem, she says, don't call me Naomi. Naomi means pleasant. She said, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. Verse 14, at this they wept aloud again, and then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. What is it that allows Orpah to go back, but Ruth can't leave Naomi? She clings to her. She makes this decision to be devoted to Naomi, to her mother-in-law, to stay with her. I'm with you. Naomi says, look, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. She makes this decision. And I believe it is faithful devotedness. I had about 3 titles to this message. The faithful devotedness of 2 women, the effects of faithful devotedness, from empty barrenness to fulfillment. It starts out with no prospects. The house of food is empty. There is a famine. They go to a foreign land. Ruth, this foreign woman, who is she? She is a nobody, right? She decides to stick it out with Naomi. And Naomi is just being faithful to her God. She hears that God's provided. They were empty, and they're going back hoping to find fulfillment. And Ruth goes with her and says, your God will be my God too. There's something about Naomi and her faithful persistence that is attractive, that Ruth says, she's got something that I'm going to stay with. There's something there. Your God's going to be my God too, and where you die, that's where I'm going to die. So they go back, and most of you might be familiar with this story. They need to have a kinsman redeemer, someone that will take them in, allow them to be on their property. And there is a close next of kin that decides not to redeem them, but then Boaz is next in line, and he says, I will. And they have this weird interaction at the city gate where they take off a sandal and ratify this choice, and he chooses to be this kinsman redeemer, marries Ruth, and Naomi couldn't be more pleased. They have, because Boaz and Ruth have a son, and his name is Obed, who has a son named Jesse, who has a son named David. Because this nobody foreign woman makes this decision to go back with her mother-in-law, look what happens. We wouldn't have the line of David if she wouldn't have made that decision. And ultimately, who comes from the line of David? Jesus. Look at this unlikely character who was a nobody that is used profoundly. And you only have to go back far in Boaz's story to Rahab, the prostitute, when they were invading Canaan, that it's through her line that Boaz even comes. So does that make Boaz even more sympathetic to this foreign woman? Because he knows that he's got Rahab as an ancestor that's joined into this line. But the significance of this decision of Ruth. There are two women in that books of the Bible are named after. Esther's the only other one. And here we have Ruth. Who do you think you are? I've asked that question before. What decisions do you make that may have lasting effect? It may be little things each day where you're just being faithful, doing what you know God is calling you to do. Maybe you're at school and you're choosing the friends you hang out with. Maybe you're figuring out how you're going to get these assignments done, have the opportunity to cheat or steal something, and you know that's not right. Maybe you're at work and there are others that have maybe less than to be desired business standards, and they're trying to get ahead, and you make the right choice to be honest in your dealings with your coworkers, with your employees, with those that might be competing against you. What decisions do you have to make where you know you're just being faithful and devoted to God? Where has God called you to live? Who has God called you to choose as a spouse? What kind of lasting effects are being created? What are the stories that people are going to tell about you? You may not see how significant some of your simple choices might pan out when we see the story about Ruth and the effects of her decision, which lead to the great-grandson of David and ultimately Jesus. As we remember Jesus this morning, it was World Communion Sunday 2 weeks ago, and we weren't planning on having World Communion Sunday that Sunday because I think a couple pastoral team members were going to be gone, and then I wasn't even here. So it was good we weren't planning to have communion. We could have had communion. The service went well, even if I wasn't here. But then last week when we had varsity singers come, and they sang, there were a number of songs that were really significant that have stuck in my head. But when we were singing Taste and See, and I saw that it was a song for communion, it was really impressed upon me about tasting and see how the Lord is good. This devoted faithfulness that we each have the opportunity to exhibit each day and all throughout our lives. How do we see that this is good? As we face trials and we face difficult things, what faithful persistence do we need to have to see that even in the face of emptiness, barrenness, that God provides fulfillment, and God provides a way when we can't see it. So as we take communion this morning, I'm going to have Pam play this song, Taste and See. And it's taken off, Taste and See is based on Psalm 34, which Don read some of already in his call to worship. And I'm going to read this psalm in its entirety as we prepare ourselves to take communion and celebrate and see that the Lord is good. I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. And I can hear Tim Shue singing that verse. I will glory in the Lord. Let the afflicted hear and rejoice. Glorify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. This poor man called, and the Lord heard him. And this is David talking. He saved him out of all his troubles. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him, and he delivers them. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Fear the Lord, you his holy people, for those who fear him lack nothing. The lions may grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. Come, my children, listen to me. I will teach you the fear of the Lord. Whoever of you loves life and desires to see many good days, keep your tongue from evil and your lips from telling lies. Turn from evil and do good. Seek peace and pursue it. The eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil, to blot out their name from the earth. The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. He saves those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. He protects all his bones, not one of them will be broken. Evil will slay the wicked. The foes of the righteous will be condemned. The Lord will rescue his servants. No one who takes refuge in him will be condemned.